Okay, hi everyone. I'm Tim Hole, and I am a high performance coach. Keynote with a difference. I'm very bored with keynotes. People doing this. I was sat in the car with my son, and my son said, I'd like to get some ice cream, Daddy. Bored. So I'm going to show you the whole deck, then we're going to go back to the beginning and I'll take you through it. So, this is me. I'm a high performance coach, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Here is the gnarly quote from Henry Rollins. Here is a bit where I'm going to talk about human intelligence working alongside artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about the you working with other people, which makes we, and then it makes us. Then I'm going to get you to call 999 because you're going to find out that you've just been stolen from. Check your pockets. I'm going to talk about how you are working under the conditions that take from you and how we need to change our workplaces into a place where you want to give. Because you are perfect, predictable producers. Then the robots come in. Ah! I know, actually, that's an American wall socket symbol, straight out of Keynote symbols, but, you know, bear with me. It looks like a robot, right? Simon Sinek is cheap. If you didn't know that, I'm going to explain that to you. Then I'm going to talk to you about Botnik Collective. Heard of those guys? Well, you will do in 2 minutes' time. And we're going to talk about the Twilight Zone and neo-generalists, also known as polymaths. We're going to talk about some key skills that people are going to need for the future workplace that you might have heard at the Utopia workshop. Science and culture, radical empathy and integrative and influential skills. I and D, not D and I. Asking how and what, and some of the things that are going to be coming out of our new creativity, like environmental impact, educational virtue, life support and progress. This is how your organisation probably looks, but this is how it needs to look. And if we can put all of this stuff together, maybe we can save the world. After that slide, I'll be going home, okay? So, let's go back to the beginning. So, like I said, I'm a high-performance coach, and with my organisation, Breathe Labs, we have a range of services which look at how human beings operate, and we try and optimise their environments to liberate the greatest level of skill and the greatest level of personality that people can bring to the workplace. But what is high-performance coaching? I liken coaching a lot to a positive form of bullying. In the first instance, a good coach will be looking for all the chinks in your armour, everything that you're weak at. And it's our job to kind of get in there and kind of stick our hand in and start waggling around and finding out what you're really trying to conceal, which is why I've got this Henry Rollins quote up there. It's the things you try to conceal that get revealed. And when it comes to human productivity, most of us get to a point where you might have heard the Peter principle, where you get promoted to your point of incompetence. Or you find yourself in an environment that taxes you so much, all the things that you've been trying to cover up, whether it was a lack of numeracy, whether it was a fear of public speaking, or something to do with time management, those things suddenly get exposed. This becomes really important when you get into a world that has artificial intelligence augmented with it. The reason for that is because you've got a lot of weakness within you. In fact, if I had an amnesty of everybody that was here today, I said, here's a bus ticket, I'd like you to write down the 3 things that you feel you're weak at. I'm pretty sure that you would quite easily be able to come up with several things that you don't want your work colleagues or your clients to know that you really should put some more work into. And the thing about that is that when you come together with other people, the we, your algorithm, that is your personality, that is the skill sets that you have at work, when it comes together with another person who is another algorithm, born of the food that you've both eaten since you grew up, the parents you had, the places you went to school, we're very full of bullet holes. There's lots of things that we've missed. There's lots of things we've formed biases about. And when we come together, we kind of bounce off each other in ways which are sometimes productive, but often we misunderstand each other and we take a long time to get into productivity. And it makes sense then, if we think of ourselves in that sort of algorithmic analogy, that's why we end up in places where we socialise with people who have got a similarity as us. And we end up in organisations that are staffed with people that come roughly from the similar Venn diagram of experience, because we can find agreement really quickly. The trouble with that is that often it's very limited, and in its ever accelerating work landscape, that us that comes out of it is sometimes falling out of the back door, not quite sure whether they've made the right thing, not sure whether they've done something innovative, or whether they've just actually managed to get something in budget and out the door on time. So, what are one of the causes of this thing? The employment contract that most of us work under is really antique and needs a lot of work to update. The employment contract is borrowed from master and servant law, which was the behavioural nudge that was put in place to end slavery. Of course, we know that slavery has never ended. However, that's the behavioural nudge, and it stopped a master being able to own someone unless they opted into it under certain terms. Those terms then became a subject of the employment contract, which opened it up and things became legal and much wider about it. But similarly, the same sort of terms of that master and servant agreement still remained. You're owned by the employer that you have. You're not allowed to speak out against that employer. They own your working hours for in certain times and won't let you work anywhere else. They own the ideas on your head so long as they're to do with the business that they've employed you for. In many respects, you're being stolen from. And it's these KPIs that end up making our organisations feel like the conditions in which we're working are set up to take from us. And this is what we can see quite often in ourselves and our colleagues, that we resent giving certain percentages of ourselves to our employers because we just want to exist within the contract that we were given. And that's what you're paying me for, so that's what I'm going to give you. And you don't want to slip either side of that. And employers are asking us things like, we'd like you to be more authentic at work. They don't want you to come in on Monday morning and go, actually, Dave, I couldn't give a fuck about your agreement. Sorry, just being authentic, they don't want that. They want to dive into this bit of you that you leave outside the door when you go to work, that bit of you which is vulnerable and real, that person maybe that had an intimate moment with their child before they left to work and would actually like to come into a meeting and talk about it, but you don't, because the environment isn't there to allow you to give. The environment is there to take from you. And that's what an employment contract looks like. And so the work I do with the RSA now is looking at how employers can move away from this situation where they're forming relationships with their employees, where they're taking from them, and creating the conditions in which those employees want to give. And I was reminded, I spoke to someone just recently who was in their early 50s, who had just been made redundant and had been struggling to find work. And he used the phrase at the time, I feel like I've got so much left to give. I'm not done yet. I feel like I've got 20 years left of me. And I reflected this to him and I said, but capitalism doesn't want you to give. Capitalism is set up to take from you. That's how the exchange works. It's a one-way system. It takes from you and remunerates you for it. It doesn't set up the scenarios in which you want to give freely, which is quite depressing when you think about it. So feel free to dial 999. You're being stolen from. So in this sort of KPI-led environment, what we end up doing is creating this situation where we are trying to be the perfect, predictable producers. Those KPIs that our employer has given us, they've said, we will remunerate you this amount of money. And in the next year, we'd like you to take on these responsibilities. KPIs, as you all will be aware of. If you hit those KPIs, we might promote you. Or at worst, we might continue your contract. But actually, you're incentivized to not step away from those KPIs because that's all they've agreed with you. Unless you're, like a white middle-class male looking like me that's particularly roguish and can go against the grain and suddenly become the runaway star, getting your creative campaign funded at the last minute. Most people end up having to target the perfect, predictable producers. But the robots are coming. And the robots are perfect, predictable producers. Not only are they perfectly predictable producers, but they get more accurate and more powerful in parallel with each other. They don't need to sleep. They can carry hundreds of thousands of these personality algorithms on them at any single time. So that many of our tasks that we have, which can be perfect and predictable, can be undercut by AI. Now, that might make you think that I am being dystopian about the rise of AI, but I'm not. What I think it's going to do is corral an area in which we can drop some of the daily routine that the earlier workshop talked about, and focus on the icing and the cherries and the creativity and the meaning in the work and how it's going to adhere itself to other human beings. And there's a lot of evidence that this is already happening. Some of you would have seen Simon Sinek's talk a couple of years ago on YouTube, where he really doubled down on millennials, and we'll say by association centennials as well, who are the generation coming up behind. And he said that they were over-entitled and they were too sensitive and they didn't want to get into craft, they just wanted to get straight to the front. And it's absolutely true, they do. But what he sees that as a negativity, because these young people may not want to work like the older generations. But the older generations have always tried to make the younger generations adapt into their existing work paradigms. And they might actually be the first generation that actually go, we're not going to work like you. We're going to change things. We're going to do things differently. And I was involved in the Digital Futures diversity project, and I was responsible for assessing all the young people that came through that scheme and boot camping them. And what I found was, I worked with about 250 young people between the ages of 17 and 24. What I found was they were all expert data scrapers. They spent their entire day looking at thousands and thousands of pages of data, and they were fantastic at working out what was authentic, what was bullshit, how they could put one story next to another, put it together into something new. And they had absolutely no previous experience of journalism or marketing or any kind of product development. They knew how to skim across all of these pieces of information and put things together. And not only that, they were able to open their laptops and create a video or an animation. And they had absolutely no interest in that sort of hierarchy that says, listen, you're not ready to do this job yet. They kind of were just looking at us the whole time going, no, I am. Look, I'm doing it. But the companies that we put them into essentially welcomed them at the door and told them to shut up. Say, in 3 years' time, we'll ask you your opinion. And they were stood in front of these organisations going, but I've got my smartphone and I can comment on anything I want in the world. I can collaborate with people on SoundCloud. I can make films. I can share all this stuff. And I'm coming into a creative communications agency and you're telling me to keep this all to myself. What's all that about? And we were having real troubles in getting them to stay within the jobs that they had because they just thought it was old school BS. So, what's coming next? Is anyone here, just a little show of hands, anyone actually consciously collaborated creatively with an AI platform? Nobody, cool. So these guys, the Botnet Collective, they're some tech heads across the world, and they've created a narrow AI platform. So narrow AI does one job. It's a very simple AI platform. This particular AI platform allows you to create new things from existing things. So they loaded all of J.K. Rowling's written work onto their narrow AI platform and created what's known as a predictive keyboard. So it's a keyboard that as soon as you start typing, it will start recommending words that J.K. Rowling may have tied together using her couplets and triplets and previous phrases. So from that, they created a new Harry Potter chapter, for example, and they've been creating all sorts of football punditry posters based around previous things that other commentators have made. And when you read it, it's very clearly not from a human being, but it's entertaining and it's slightly psychedelic, and I highly recommend you go on and have a play. One of my favourite projects they've done is on the Twilight Zone. So they took all the Twilight Zone monologues and placed them into their predictive keyboard and generated 4 or 5 new monologues. Now this monologue, I'll read it to you in a moment, probably, I would say, took about 5 minutes to create on their platform. And when you're on it, you sort of suddenly realise that you didn't have to do 5 years at university, you didn't have to learn how to write or read all the other monologues. You were there within this very limited framework of information creating new stuff. So let's read it. The past is always located in the past. A fact is always fiction to a child. A fanciful exercise in logic, but a rather tragic lesson in responsibility. So it happens to be the beginning of a honeymoon that will lead this particular Mrs. Yesterday to a future that is made of terror, 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 terror. If you happen to find yourself in a room with an exit, then perhaps it's an exit you want to take. It's a moment in time, only a moment, yet this moment is the present, and in this case, it is also the twilight zone. So like I said, that probably took about 4 minutes to create on their predictive keyboard that you can go and play with if you go on their website right now. And they have numerous different ways in which you can experience collaborating with AI. So I've been working with all of these centennials and millennials, and I found that virtually all of them right now are neo-generalists, or what you might call a polymath. They're available to turn their hand to pretty much anything. But what they're going into is circumstances which aren't ready to cater for them. And those circumstances are actually trying to conservatize their skill sets rather than expand them. And as we look at the future, what it tells us is that more than likely, if we're going to be collaborating with AI, these are the skill sets that are going to be absolutely imperative for someone to have at least a really GCSE grasp, science and culture, a radical empathy. So that's being able to sympathize or empathize with our enemies as well as our allies, and be integrative and influential in the way that we communicate. This leads us to I&D. This is probably the most sort of backdoor conversation I've had with anyone about diversity and inclusion. And inclusion is definitely first, as you might have heard in previous sessions today. So the inclusion part is so important, and if we're getting that bit right, it will look like organisations that are able to take best advantage of these polymaths and these neo-generalists and put them into great use. I'm going to skip this. The way we do this is by creating environments where we talk to each other more. We utilise our diversity more, and that's by a slow-down function of asking each other more questions, which sounds very simplistic, but actually what we find ourselves with our KPI-led employment contracts is we're in the workplace feeling like we have to sound like an expert all the time, that it's not cool to have a wrong answer. When anyone asks us anything, we're supposed to have the 3 best answers queued up straight away. But actually the better thing to do is to ask 25 other people the same questions and to find out very quickly what we think of what we're doing. The experiments I did with the Digital Futures crowd ended up creating some innovations which have been implemented by people like the Swedish government, who have now put 2 electric cars in every high school in Sweden, and you can now get an electric-only driving license if you're a Swedish teenager, which you then have to pay more money to upgrade to a fossil fuel license after you have left school. And that came out of some ideations that we did in East London with some young people from Hackney and Tottenham who had no previous experience in marketing or product design. And they came up with these innovations, which I happened to be able to give to the head of the European Climate Org, and he gave them to the Swedish government, who then got Renault to pay for their implementation. So there's some really amazing things that we're getting from just asking the right, wide questions of young people, which is then leading our organisations to go from the triangle, which is probably how your organisation looks right now, and nothing that will be of any new thing, with a fat top, kind of fattish middle, and then a big bottom line of hierarchy, moving to something that looks more like a fingerprint. And I use this to indicate how actually most organisations need to surround everything they do with the most junior rankings of hiring and sweep their intelligence into the middle section, which is where you put your more experienced rankings. So instead of this triangle, actually you've got intelligence that's swirling round right into the middle. So you gave me 4 more minutes, I love you. So if we use diversity properly, we can actually then start thinking about AI as an opportunity to load it up with our 10 commandments. If we sort of say, right, actually we want to save ourselves, we want to stop manufacturing things that take more away from the planet than add to the planet. We want to stop manufacturing food in a way that causes dysfunction, or the rainforest being cut down or something like that. We can actually charge the AI to help run us almost as a Lord and Saviour. So, is anyone up for a quick exercise on asking? Yes, of course you are. Love that at the back. Thank you. Listen, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a very, very quick coaching exercise. I've been using this exercise now with people for the last few years, and it's liberated a lot of relationships, both in leadership and in personal too. What you do is you stand opposite someone and you ask them a question that begins with the word what or how. It could be, what's your favourite film? or even how do you feel? That person will give you an answer. Based on that answer, you ask another question. That question will start with a what or a how. And it will use the data that that person gave you before. So, if you ask what's your favourite film and the person says Star Wars, you might then say, what's your favourite chapter? How many times have you seen it? What's your favourite character? The idea is to hold that person in their space to find out exactly what they're thinking about the subject matter that you're on. Talking about Star Wars is pretty lightweight, or your favourite food, or what kind of holidays you like. But actually, when you take it into the workplace and you start asking your boss or the people who directly report to you what they feel about exactly the problem that they're bringing to you, how they see it being played out, what would good look like, what's the worst that can happen. Suddenly we find out where these meetings where you usually attend, where there's a grand tug of war between I'm saying something and you're saying something and now I'm saying something and nothing getting decided. If you can hold space to just find out exactly what the people you are collaborating with are thinking, and they do the same thing for you, we end up with much quicker routes to action.